Right, we're back. I've cleaned everything to within an inch of its life. The last thing to do, obviously, before we put it back in, is to replace the brake pad in here. Just make sure you don't get any grease or stuff on it. And I've also just slightly inserted this pad. I've also inserted this screw thread for the tensioning screw for the cable, and I've also greased up the inside of the adjustment arm. Now for this we've used LM grease as recommended. I've also greased the screw thread as well, and that is fully greased up inside. One trick I learned a while ago for helping get grease into hard to reach places is to get an old syringe. File off the end here so you've got no sharp bit. Obviously you don't want to be stabbing anything with grease in it. And then you can take the needle piece off and fill the syringe body with grease. This then allows you to get grease right into those hard to reach places that you otherwise might not be able to reach, and it's a great little way I found to get the grease right where you need it. So yeah, that's a little trick there. So that's the adjustment arm all greased up. The next thing to do is to insert and grease the pin. So I've got the O-ring on the bottom there, and I'm just going to whack a load of grease all on this. Get some grease on that. Mainly this bottom in this recess here, which is a little reservoir for storing the grease, etc. And right in the top here. So that's all nicely greased up. That then goes in. Now the caliper sits on the bike like this, single pin at the bottom, double at the top. So we just whack that in through there, move it about a bit, get that grease spread out. And no harm whacking a bit more in there for good measure. Top piece, and then we want the other O-ring. And a little bit of grease just on there. Okay, so there's that all greased up and processed, ready to install the main caliper back on the bike. So let's go to the bike and get this fitted. So here we are back at the bike. First thing to do is to get the caliper unit on. So slide that over that, pushing that mudguard in. We then get that in place, and I'd always recommend starting with the bottom pin, and then it doesn't fall out at an inappropriate time. So we get that lined up. That started, and then for the top caliper in here. I'd always recommend when putting bolts, particularly bolts into aluminium, that you always start them by hand if you can. What I've done here, I've just loosened off the screws on the back of the mud guard, the other side here, just put a bit more play in the mud guard, and then rotating this then allows me to do these screws up by hand. So they're just in there. So okay, caliper body in there nicely. Right, now to get the cable replaced back in place and the actual main parts for the internal workings. So I'll go get those and we'll fit those. Right, we've put the brake cable back in, making sure it goes through the keepers on the yoke and through the keeper at the top. Otherwise it's right pain in the ass to put it in otherwise. Then got it screwed all the way through, and the brake cable coming out with its spring and the little rubber grommet on that. At this stage I'd again get in there with some grease and just grease that up. Now I've already greased the actual oiled the brake cable itself. That's all lubed up now, but we can get right in here, particularly with the little syringe, and just whack some more in there. Right, there's that done. Okay, the next bit is to get the thrust plate on. So that sits onto there and into that space in there. And we also, what they need to do is to make sure that the pad lines up with that hole there, so that we can get the adjustment arm onto that. This pin here needs to line up and go into that hole there of the pad. So adjustment screw in all the way, outside piece on. We've then got to put this on. Only goes on one way. We need this unit here to sit inside, so this side is larger hole on this side compared to this side, so the smaller hole goes towards the back of the bike, the larger hole goes towards the front of the bike. So we need to insert this part way, then we need to get our brake cable all the way out, retract the spring, bring that caper over, and then seat the end of the brake lead cable nicely in there. We then bring it back, and that's now going nowhere. We can then put our thrust plate on, but it's fallen off. We need to make sure that the lug goes against the bike, so the space towards us, so the lug towards the bike, space towards us. Put that on like that. Okay, and we're in at this stage. Now at this point I'd suggest just putting the housing back with no gasket, and I'm just putting a screw in enough just to hold all of that in place. Well, I then got to the top and put the brake cable onto the brake lever. Then back here we can then take that bolt out, carefully take it out, and make sure that everything is where it should be. So, and get on the gasket, and you can screw that in a bit. I'd leave it. You just want to make sure though that it is freely rotating. The screw's not bound at all in there. And then we carefully put on the cover. And screw that all together. Right. You now want to do these up in turn, because they sit around this point here, and we want this unit to brace against the main body evenly. I'm still playing that against the pads. Right, hopefully that's all done okay. Now make sure that your brake cable into the brake lever is seated properly. You can then start adjusting this screw out to start removing the slack that will be in the cable. As we pull the brake lever, we'll start hearing the clicking in here, and we'll start losing that play in as the brake pads come into connection with the brake disc. Now, we've got rid of some of that slack in there, and there's still quite a bit of play in the lever. So we then start unscrewing this to remove the play in the lever. Now that's fitting quite tight now, and there's not much play in that. What we really need to do now is to get the bike out onto the road so we can roll the bike forward and backwards, or in my case I need a bit more space in the garage to get the bike on its back wheel so we can rotate the front wheel. Once we've got some free play, we then adjust this adjustment screw finally, so that the wheel moves freely, but we then apply the brake lever, we get good bind in that, and we don't want much play in this caliper against, we want the pads nicely seated against the actual disc itself. So in tomorrow during the daytime, I'll get the bike out onto the driveway, and we'll do the final adjustment on the brake itself, to keep as a reminder that I haven't finished with it yet, and that it needs some final adjustment. I'll do that so I know and I remember that I haven't finished adjusting the brake. But in essence, that is the brake removed, stripped, cleaned, refurbished and reinstalled, and all that's left to do now is the final tweaking on the adjustment. And obviously don't forget to put the rubber boot back on the brake lever. So we'll do that now, and that's this job done until tomorrow during the day, and we can get it on the driveway. So we're finished up at this end now, so we'll replace the rubber boot onto the handlebars up here. And there we are. There's that finished. Now the final job is to obviously clear up and clear away the white spirit that we use. I've got a bit of kitchen roll that I folded into a triangle into half. You know, the old chemistry lessons and the filter paper and all that kind of stuff. Into there, it catches any bits that have fallen off, of course, and also filters it a little bit. If you are going to use an ultrasonic cleaner, one thing to bear in mind is that the process of it working on the parts, it does warm them up through the oscillation. So just bear in mind, particularly when you're using white spirits, flammable, that you don't want them getting too hot through the ultrasonic cleaner. So just bear that in mind as a safety point. Obviously no smoking, wear protective equipment and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I just thought that was worth mentioning as I've been going through. And then my last rag is in the right state, just to give this a clean and tidy. But yeah, ultrasonic cleaning is really good. These jewellery ones are relatively cheap these days. You don't need a huge massive one. Oh, well, depending on the size of the parts you're cleaning, I suppose. So yeah, so we'll get the bike out onto the driveway. We'll do the final adjustments on the caliper, and I hope you found this video to be useful, and enjoy. So right, I've cleared the garage. I've got the bike out on its centre stand with a bit of weight on the back to the front wheel 3, and as you can see, the front wheel can freely rotate. But there's quite a bit of play on the brake lever. So what we do is we wind this out just to remove that play. But without binding up the wheel. So there we are. Once we've done that, onto the lock nut and just nip that up. Now, apart from taking this out on the road and doing a road test with this, obviously taking it quite easy, that's about as much as we can do. We've adjusted that now. The wheel can move freely. We've removed the play within the lever, but we've still got enough travel within the lever for good brake activation. So yeah, so that is the rebuild, strip, service and rebuild on a Honda CB200 front caliper brake assembly. I hope you found the video useful. Do take care if you're doing this kind of work. Always refer to the workshop manual. I'd recommend get one. You've got Haynes Fairy Tales, as it were, or there are a couple of other brands out there that are doing them. The Haynes one, by the way, really refers to the CB175 and to other bikes. The 200 is a supplement in there, but the bike is generally the same as the 175. So yeah, so I hope that was useful, and keep tuned for the next video. Cheers.